Senator Hiromo. Welcome to our committee, Mr. Attorney General, and let me just begin by thanking you and your team for the sense of integrity and transparency that you brought to the Department of Justice after a time when the rule of law in the greatest law enforcement agency in the history of the world was gravely threatened by a lack of that dedication and commitment. I think it's very important what you have done, even though we may have differences of opinion, we may disagree, but nobody can doubt your commitment to the rule of law. I want to ask you about a matter. I know you're familiar with it. Last month, the committee held a hearing on the FBI's mishandling of the Nassar investigation. Larry Nassar, who was convicted of the most heinous kind of abuse with respect to young athletes and gymnasts, particularly. 4 brave women shared their stories with us. They showed up to tell those stories in spite of the very grave obstacles. The Inspector General concluded that 2 FBI agents made false statements during their investigation into Nassar. And to the IG himself, the Inspector General, during an investigation, the FBI agents lied. He referred those cases to the Department of Justice. What I'd like to ask is that the Department of Justice now, in effect, show up by providing an explanation of whatever its decision is with respect to the prosecution of those agents. The Deputy Attorney General announced that the Criminal Division was conducting a new review, as you know, and that new information has come to light. While we wait for that review to be completed, what I'm seeking from you is a commitment that you will explain the decision when it's made. I recognize as a former prosecutor that declinations typically are not explained, but the Justice Manual itself says that in criminal civil rights cases, quote, it is often the practice to send case closing notification letters in cases closed with indictment or prosecution because cases, quote, often spark intense public interest even when they're not prosecuted, and that such letters are, quote, particularly encouraged in cases of police misconduct and other cases involving law enforcement officer subjects, end quote. In this case, we have exactly that situation, and I'm asking for a commitment that you will provide an explanation for your decision.
Well, Senator, this is a hard problem for us. The part of the manual that you're talking about is about violations of the Civil Rights Act, and what we're talking about here are false statements. Needless to say, if the result of this review is a prosecution, that will become public. On the question of how much, whether and how much we can say if all we do is decline, I'm just going to have to take that back for consideration. I take your point, and I will think about it very carefully, as will the Criminal Division.
I understand you're not ruling it out, but I'm going to continue to press for an explanation. I think the gymnasts deserve it, so does the American public. And I hope that you will make a decision to provide a full and complete explanation, because I think the credibility of the decision will largely depend on it. And let me just say, in my view, we need to do more than focus on the FBI agents that the Inspector General referred for prosecution, because this failure was an institutional failure. Institutional to the FBI, to USA Gymnastics, and the entire Olympic system. It was an institutional breakdown. And to date, there's been no accountability for anyone in power. To that end, I am announcing that in the Commerce Subcommittee that I chair, the Subcommittee on Consumer Protection, we're going to continue the work that Senator Moran and I began years ago. We literally began it years ago with the investigation and Olympics reform legislation. We're going to engage in further oversight of the United States Olympic and Paralympics Committee, the national governing bodies, and Safe Sport to ensure their purported commitment to safety is not an empty promise. The gymnasts have asked us, they deserve it, and we're going to fulfill that obligation. But in my view, the Department of Justice has to do more as well, given the FBI's gross mishandling of the Nassar investigation. I believe a new review of all of the information related to Nassar and the USOPC more broadly is warranted here, because there are other examples of potential misconduct that deserve a fresh look. For instance, Senator Moran and I referred the former CEO of the USOPC to the Department of Justice for potentially perjuring himself before our subcommittee in 2018. We don't know what, if anything, the department did with that referral. We've heard virtually nothing. In addition, the former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Indiana, whose office was involved in the Nassar investigation, is now representing one of the disgraced FBI agents. He's representing one of the FBI agents referred for prosecution. I don't know whether that's a violation of ethical rules or some other kinds of Department of Justice policies, but it raises significant questions, and the department should have an interest in them. So I hope that we can expect more from you by way of explanation, and I hope that we can count on you for a new review of the information related to the Nassar investigation, USA Gymnastics, and USOPC to determine whether there are additional cases where prosecution is necessary to hold wrongdoers accountable.
The institutional failure that you speak of is quite apparent. I thought that the testimony by the gymnasts was, as I said, heart-wrenching, and they were courageous. The FBI director has adopted all of the recommendations of the Inspector General and is putting them into effect. And in addition, we have adopted new regulations, new authorities in the department to be clear that if the FBI is investigating a case of assault on a child and determines that it no longer that it doesn't have jurisdiction, it immediately inform the relevant state or local prosecutors and law enforcement. This is what didn't happen in the Nassar circumstance, and ensure that is done so that the state and local will be able to continue. Likewise, with respect to transfers from one FBI office to another failure under those in that case, that those be monitored to ensure that those transfers occurred. We take this extremely seriously. What happened is just awful. And you have the commitment of the Justice Department and of the FBI director and of the FBI to make these kinds of institutional changes to ensure that this doesn't happen again.
I appreciate those points, but as you well know, because of your own long and impressive record as a prosecutor, there's nothing like accountability, individuals being held accountable to send a message, particularly a deterrent message, to an institution. Thank you, Madam Chair.